Please. Not both. Please. Please, I'm begging you. Not both. Please. Not both. Awu. Wa. Don't let them do this. Don't let them take us apart. Please stand with me. Don't let go.
Please, she kept saying, her voice cracking on the word until it barely sounded like a word at all. Please, not both. Please.
The rule was simple. No twin child could leave the crossroads alive. For as long as anyone in Origbo could remember, that was the law, and no one asked where it came from anymore. It had simply always been there, the way the river was always there, the way the Hamatan wind always came in December. When twins were born in that village, they had to be sacrificed at the crossroads. That was the price the land demanded, or so the elders said, and the elders had never once been wrong about anything that mattered. On the night the story begins, a woman named Aduke was screaming at the edge of the shrine, and two grown men were holding her back by the arms because she would not stop trying to reach her children, both of them. She wanted both of them. The priestess would not look at her. She stood over two newborns, wrapped in the same faded cloth, a blade of dried palm frond in her right hand, her lips moving in a language older than the village itself. Torches burned around the shrine in a wide, uneven circle, and beyond them, in the dark, half of Origbo stood watching in silence because watching was required. That was also the law. No one was permitted to look away except the parents of the children. The sky over Origbo had been the color of a healing bruise since noon, and by the time the sun disappeared behind the hills, nobody in the village doubted that the night ahead would be a hard one. They simply did not yet know how hard or for whom. Two of the elders came for her just as the first real growl of thunder rolled over the hills. "It is time," one of them said, not unkindly. His name was Ojo, and he had known Aduke since she was a girl, small enough to ride his shoulders during festival season. And even now, doing what the law required of him, his eyes would not quite meet hers. "Come, both of you. You are not to stay for this part." "Why?" Aduke said, though she already knew the answer, though everyone in Origbo already knew the answer, because it was the same answer it had always been for 100 years. "Because no mother should watch it," Ojo said. "Because it is easier this way. Iyabo will finish what must be finished. Come." Aduke did not move. Tears welled up in her eyes. Her husband touched her elbow. Just that, a touch, not a word, and something in the touch made her shoulders drop, made the fight go out of her all at once, the way it does in people who have already lost battles like this one long before they were born into them. She let them lead her away. She did not look back at the crossroads as they walked her toward the far end of the village, though every part of her wanted to. Thunder cracked again, closer now, and somewhere behind them, at the place where two old paths met beneath the shrine's leaning roof, Iyabo the priestess stood waiting with a blade of dried palm frond in her hand and two crying infants set down gently on a mat before her, and the first heavy drops of rain had already begun to fall. What Iyabo did in the hours that followed, no one in Origbo would learn for 22 years. Welcome to the Secret Tales of Africa besties. If you're new here, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the intense, dramatic Secret Tales of Africa we release every day. Turn on notifications because this story is only just beginning. And trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Now, let's continue our story. Iyabo had done this before, not this exact rite. Twins were rare in Origbo, rarer than rain in a drought, and in all her years serving the shrine, she had never once had to perform this particular ceremony with her own two hands. She had only been told how, recited to her once by the old priestess before her in the same flat, practiced voice one might use to describe how to plant yams or weave a roof. This is what must be done, should it ever be required of you. Iyabo had nodded and memorized every word and privately hoped, the way any sensible person hopes, to never be tested on the worst thing they know, that it would never actually be required of her. Now it was raining, and it was required of her, and her hands were not as steady as she wanted them to be. The elders who had gathered to witness, because someone always gathered to witness, that too was the law. No one permitted to look away from what the village asked of itself, began peeling off into the dark, one by one, as the storm worsened. First, the older men, murmuring apologies to no one in particular, ducking beneath the eaves of nearby compounds. Then the younger ones, less willing to say anything at all, simply vanishing into the rain with their heads down. Baba Fashina was the last to go. He stood at the shrine's edge, longer than anyone, arms folded against the wet, watching Iyabo kneel over the two infants with an expression on her face that he did not like and could not name. He had organized this night down to its smallest detail, the timing, the witnesses, the order of the procession, because he believed, the way he believed almost nothing else in his life, that Origbo's harvest and Origbo's health depended on this law being kept exactly as written. But even he, standing there in the rising wind, felt something in his chest tighten at the sight of her hesitating. "It is already in motion," he called to her over the thunder, more to convince himself than to instruct her. "Finish it before midnight. The storm will not wait for you, and neither will the law." Iyabo did not answer him. She only nodded once, barely, her eyes still fixed on the two small faces in front of her, and Baba Fashina told himself that was answer enough, and turned and walked away into the rain like everyone else before him. Which meant that when the storm broke fully open over Origbo, a wall of rain so sudden and so violent that it swallowed the shrine, the crossroads, the thin dirt path down to the river, all of it within minutes. There was no one left standing at that place to see exactly what Iyabo did next. No one but Iyabo herself. And 22 years would pass before she told another living soul the truth of it. The rain did not stop for almost 2 hours. What became of that stretch of night has never been told in full by anyone who lived through it, because only one person was there to see it, and for 22 years, she chose to let the silence stand in for the truth. What is known, what Origbo pieced together in whispers over the years that followed, the way villages always piece together the parts of a story no one will finish, is this much. Iyabo did not complete the rite at the shrine. The storm made it impossible. The wind tore at the thin roof over the crossroads until she could no longer keep the infants dry or calm beneath it, and so she gathered them up, one against each shoulder, and carried them down toward the river bank instead, to a stand of tall grass that offered at least some shelter from the worst of the wind. She told herself it was only a delay. She told herself she would wait out the heaviest part of the storm and then return to finish what the night required of her, because the law was clear on this point, if nothing else. Before midnight, both children, no exceptions granted for weather, no exceptions granted for anything at all. The infant cried the entire time. She remembered that clearly, even 22 years later, more clearly than she remembered almost anything else about that night. Two small voices crying into a storm, loud enough to swallow them. At some point, she could never afterwards say exactly when, only that it felt like both a single breath and an entire lifetime. The rain grew too violent, even for the riverbank grass to shelter them, and Iyabo made a decision she would spend the rest of her life trying not to examine too closely. She left the children where they lay, told herself it would only be a moment, and ran the short distance back to her own hut to fetch a heavier cloth, something to shield them properly until the worst of the storm passed. She was gone longer than a moment. The storm made sure of that. When she finally forced her way back down to the river bank, soaked through, stumbling in the dark, the water had already risen higher than she had ever seen it rise in that spot, fast and brown and full of debris torn loose from higher ground. She called out, she searched, she found, eventually, snagged on a falling branch at the water's edge, a single scrap of white cloth, a wrapper, one of the two the infant had been carried in, and nothing else. No infant, no blue wrapper, nothing. She stood there in the flood swollen dark for a long time before she made herself walk back to the village, and by the time she reached the elders, waiting under whatever shelter they had found, she had already decided, somewhere in that long walk, what she was going to say. She told them it was finished. She did not say how. No one asked her to elaborate. That too was the custom, a mercy extended to whoever carried out the rite, that the details never needed to be spoken aloud again once the deed was done. Baba Fashina nodded once, grim and satisfied that the law had held even against the fury of the storm, and Origbo, exhausted and soaked and frightened by the violence of that particular night, simply moved forward, the way villages always move forward, carrying their grief and their relief in the same breath and calling it closed. It was not closed, not for Iyabo, and though she did not yet know it, not for the river either. 22 years is a long time to carry a single unfinished night inside your chest, and Iyabo had carried it every single day since, though she had gotten skilled the way only guilt makes a person skilled, at not letting it show. She no longer slept in the shrine house. She had moved out 2 seasons after that storm and told no one why, though if pressed, she might have said something about wanting to be closer to her daughter, which was true, just not the whole truth. The whole truth was that she could no longer stand at the crossroads after dark without hearing or believing she heard something underneath the wind. Not quite crying, not quite anything she could name, just 2 small sounds she had spent 22 years telling herself were only ever the river. Baba Fashina's decline had been slower, but it had come all the same. His compound had once produced the finest harvest in Origbo 3 years running, and now, in the 5th consecutive season of failing rain, His own farm looked no better than anyone else's. Worse, some said, quietly, when they thought he could not hear them. He had built his entire standing in this village on the certainty that the old law protected them. He had never once, in 40 years, allowed himself to wonder aloud whether it might have failed. But lately, alone in his fields at dusk, watching cracked earth where a river used to run, the wandering came anyway, uninvited, and it terrified him more than any storm ever had. And Aduke's husband, who had let two elders lead his wife away without once reaching for either child himself, had spent 22 years watching her go quiet on the same day every year, and 22 years not asking her why, because some part of him already knew the answer would require him to admit something about himself he did not yet have the courage to say out loud, that he had let his fear stand in the exact place where he should have stood instead. All three of them were still carrying their separate silences on the morning the drought entered a season no one had a name for anymore, when two strangers walked into Origbo's market at first light, a young man and a young woman, close enough in age and bearing that more than one trader looked twice, wondering, before catching themselves, whether they might be looking at brother and sister. They said they were diviners, passing through, offering to find the cause of the failing rains for whatever the village could spare in food and lodging. It was the woman who spoke first to the fish seller nearest the market gate, and what she said made the old woman's hands go still over her basket. "You still hold market on the third day," the stranger said, "the way it was done before the crossroads law changed the calendar." The fish seller had not heard anyone say those words in over a decade. She had not even known there was a version of Origbo old enough to remember a calendar before the law. "How do you know that?" she asked. The young woman only smiled and reached up to adjust something at her wrist, a woven bracelet, faded with age, a pattern the fish seller couldn't place, but that would have stopped Aduke cold in her tracks had she been standing there to see it. The fish seller told her neighbor before the strangers had even reached the far end of the market, and her neighbor told the man selling kola nuts, and by the time the sun had climbed fully over the baobab tree at the market center, half of Origbo had already heard some version of what the two strangers had said, though by the fifth or sixth retelling, "You still hold market on the third day" had become "They know things no outsider should know," which was truer to the feeling of it, if not the exact words. Baba Fashina heard the story from his own nephew, who ran breathless into his compound with it as though he were bringing news of a fire. The question on every face in that market was the same one Baba Fashina hadn't dared ask out loud. How could two strangers know so much about a place they had never lived in? "Two strangers," the boy said, "a man and a woman. They say they can find why the rain has stopped." Baba Fashina did not stand immediately. He had learned over 5 failed harvests to be suspicious of anyone who arrived offering an easy answer to a problem that had already humbled every wise man he knew. But he also could not deny, sitting there in the dim light of his own compound, that something in his chest had tightened at the word "diviners" in a way he didn't like and couldn't yet explain. "Bring them to me," he said finally, "before they speak to anyone else." But it was already too late for that. By midday, The strangers had spoken to a dozen people, and the priestess Iyabo had heard about them from her own daughter, who mentioned it lightly, in passing, the way one might mention any piece of market gossip. New travelers, a woman with a bracelet, a man who knew the old names for things. Iyabo did not react the way her daughter expected. She set down the pot she was washing so quickly it nearly cracked against the stone, and she stood very still for a long moment, staring at nothing, while her daughter asked, twice, whether she was all right. Tell me in the comments what you think and stay with this story. Will Iyabo be finally exposed? What would be the reaction of Aduke when she finally realizes she has been sold lies for 22 years? And if you've not subscribed to this channel, what are you doing? Subscribe now, because this story is about to get much worse before it gets anywhere close to justice. What did you say the woman was wearing? Iyabo asked, and her voice did not sound like her own voice. A bracelet, woven, nothing special. Why, Iya? Iyabo did not answer. She was already moving toward the door, toward the market, moving faster than her daughter had seen her move in years. And her daughter called after her, confused, unanswered, watching her mother disappear down the path with the particular urgency of someone running not towards something, but away from a memory that had finally caught up to her. By the time Iyabo reached the market gate, Baba Fashina had already found the strangers. He stood in front of them with his arms folded, flanked by two of his sons, and though he had told himself on the walk over that he would be measured, that he would ask careful questions and listen carefully to the answers, what came out of his mouth instead was sharper than he intended. Who sent you here? The young man, calm, unhurried, not remotely intimidated by the three men in front of him, tilted his head slightly. No one sent us, Baba. We came because the river doesn't run anymore, and we know why. You don't know anything about this village. We know it kept market on the third day, the young man said, before the crossroads law changed the calendar to keep people close to the shrine on ritual nights. We know the shrine sits at the place where two paths used to cross a spring before the spring was sealed. We know the law that changed all of that was never about the harvest at all, no matter what anyone believes now. Who told you these things? He said. About our calendar, about this village. The young man met his eyes without flinching, and there was nothing performed in it, no theater of mystery, only a kind of tired patience that comes from having explained something difficult more than once before. No one told us, Baba. We pieced it together over years. We were found as infants near a river bank 2 days from here, raised by people who had given up hope of children of their own and thought we were sent to them. The cloth we were wrapped in had a weave nobody in that village could place. It took a long time and a lot of listening to river traders passing through before anyone mentioned a settlement upstream called Origbo, whose spring had gone strange the same year. Unexplained floods hit this whole stretch of the valley, and where weaves like ours could be found. The market had gone quiet around them. People had stopped pretending not to listen. Baba Fashina's face had gone very still. The particular stillness of a man working hard not to let his expression show how deeply a stranger's words had landed. Careful, he said low. You are speaking of things that are not yours to speak of. We know that too, Baba. the young woman said gently. We were there. It was not a threat. It was not delivered with any anger at all, but something about the plainness of it. We were there, moved through the gathered crowd like a cold wind, because everyone doing the arithmetic in their heads knew exactly what that sentence would have to mean if it were true, and exactly how old these two strangers were, and exactly how many years it had been since the last time twins were born in Origbo. Baba Fashina's jaw tightened. That means nothing. Rivers flood. Children are found. It does not mean. We know, the young woman said gently, cutting in without raising her voice. We are not asking you to believe a feeling, Baba. We came because we wanted to see the place ourselves. That's all. We didn't expect anyone to recognize anything. It was at that moment that Iyabo pushed through the edge of the crowd, breathless, and stopped. She was looking at the young woman's wrist, at the bracelet, faded, frayed at one edge, the weave uneven in a way that spoke of a hand that had been in a hurry, of thread pulled tight with fear rather than patience, and Iyabo knew that pattern. She had watched Aduke tie it herself 22 years ago in the dark, minutes before the ritual, her fingers shaking so badly the knots had come out crooked. Iyabo had told herself for 22 years that she had imagined the whole thing, that the guilt had simply invented a memory soft enough to live with. She had not imagined it. Word reached Aduke an hour later, the way word reaches everyone last in a village where everyone assumes someone else has already told you. She was at the grinding stone behind her house when her neighbor's daughter came running with it, talking too fast, something about strangers and a bracelet, and Iyabo running through the market like something had chased her, and Aduke barely heard half of it before she was already walking, then moving faster than walking toward the market square, her hands still dusted white with cassava flour, her heart doing something violent and unfamiliar in her chest. She saw the young woman before the young woman saw her. She saw the bracelet first, then the face, then, impossibly, the second face beside it, the young man, close enough in age, close enough in the set of his jaw, close enough to a face she had carried behind her eyes for 22 years without ever letting herself look at it directly. The wooden bowl she had been carrying slipped from her hands and shattered against the ground, and the sound of it seemed to reach every corner of the market at once, because every conversation stopped and every head turned, and Aduke stood frozen in the middle of it all, with flour dust still on her fingers, and her mouth open around a word that would not come. For a long moment, nobody moved. The market, which had been loud with bartering and the clatter of pots only minutes before, had gone so quiet that Aduke could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the flies circling the broken calabash at her feet, could hear, somewhere behind her, Baba Fashina's breath catching in his throat, the way a man's breath catches when the ground he has stood on his whole life shifts without warning. It was the young woman who moved first. She stepped forward slowly, the way one might approach something wild and frightened, hands open at her sides, and when she spoke, her voice was soft enough that only the people closest could hear it. "Mama," she said. One word. That was all it took to break something loose in Aduke that had been held shut for 22 years. No, Aduke whispered, shaking her head, backing a step away, even as her whole body strained forward. No, you are not. This is not. It's true, the young man said, and his voice cracked on it, betraying an age he was trying hard to sound older than. It's us. Aduke's knees buckled. Two women nearby caught her before she hit the ground, and the market erupted into noise all at once. Gasps, questions shouted over each other, someone's child crying at the sudden chaos. Baba Fashina's voice rising above it all, sharp and disbelieving. This is not possible, he said, though even as the words left him, they sounded thin, unconvincing even to his own ears. The rite was completed. I gave the order myself. I left only once I was certain it was already in motion. You watched the ritual start, not completed, Iyabo said. Every head turned to her. She had gone very pale, standing at the edge of the crowd, with her hands pressed flat against her own chest, as though trying to hold herself together by force. Iyabo, Baba Fashina said slowly, dangerously. What do you mean by that? She did not answer right away. Aduke had been helped to her feet by then, and she was staring at Iyabo now too, and something in the old priestess's face, a guilt too heavy to carry any further, a secret that had simply run out of room to hide, told everyone present that whatever came next was going to change the shape of everything they thought they knew about that night. I mean, Iyabo said finally, that I could not do it. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Iyabo, what do you mean? She did not answer immediately. Aduke had been helped to standing by then, staring at Iyabo with the particular stillness of a woman who already suspects the ground is about to open beneath her too, and the whole market waited, breath held, for whatever the priestess was finally, after 22 years, about to say. I mean, Iyabo said, that I never finished what I told you I finished. I have carried a lie inside this village for 22 years, and it is time all of you heard the truth of what actually happened that night, storm and all. The crowd had gone utterly silent, save for the low mutter of thunderless wind moving through the market stalls, as if even the sky was waiting to hear what Iyabo would say next. That night, she began, her voice unsteady but no longer hiding. The storm broke before I could complete the rite at the shrine. I carried them down to the river bank for shelter, thinking I would only wait out the worst of it. I left them there, only for a moment, to fetch a heavier cloth from my hut. The moment became longer than I intended. When I came back, the river had already risen. I found one wrapper caught on a branch. Nothing else. No children. I searched until I could search no more, and then I walked back to this village and told you all it was finished, because I did not know what else to say, and because I believed, truly believed, that they were gone. You lied, Aduke said. Her voice did not shake the way it had a moment ago. It had gone flat and hard instead, the voice of a woman who has finally found the exact shape of her anger after 22 years of not knowing where to aim it. You didn't lie to protect them. You lied to protect yourself. You let this whole village believe the law had been kept, when the truth is, you never actually knew what happened to my children. You chose the version that made you safe instead of the version that was true. Yes, Yabo said simply, because there was nothing left to defend. That is exactly what I did. 22 years, Aduke said, and now her voice did break, finally, all at once. 22 years I grieved a story that wasn't even real, not the truth, not a mercy, just whatever kept the law looking clean. Her husband stepped forward then, closer to her than he had stood in longer than either of them could remember, and when he spoke, it was not to Iyabo. I let them lead you away that night, he said to Aduke, and I told myself for 22 years it was the kinder choice, that a mother should be spared what a father could endure. That was never true. I was afraid, and I let my fear stand exactly where I should have stood instead. I am sorry. I have been sorry every single year on that date, and I never once told you why. Aduke did not answer him. Not yet. But she did not pull away when he reached for her hand either, and that, for now, was its own kind of answer. It was the young man who spoke next, quietly, into the silence that followed. The river didn't take us to punish this village, Mama. It carried us to people who wanted us. Maybe it refused to be part of what this place asked of it that very first night, and everything that's happened since has been the land trying to tell you the same thing in the only language it has left. Baba Fashina, who had said almost nothing since the confession began, finally lifted his head. His face had gone pale, stripped of 40 years of certainty in the space of a single conversation. If the river refused it then, he said slowly, what has it been asking for instead? We can show you, the young woman said. But you have to be willing to hear that what you've enforced for 40 years was built on something far older than any of us actually understood. They walked to the shrine as the afternoon light began to soften, and half of Origbo walked with them, drawn by a pull no one bothered to explain to their neighbors. At the crossroads, the young woman knelt at the exact spot where the rite had always been performed and began clearing away dirt and dry grass with her bare hands, unhurried, as though she had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times on the 2-day walk here. Beneath the topsoil, stones, fitted together with a precision no accident of nature could explain. Help me, she said, and it was Baba Fashina himself who knelt beside her first, his sons following, then others, then Aduke, then Iyabo last of all, her hands trembling as she lifted stone after stone alongside the very people she had lied to for 22 years. It took the better part of an hour. When the final stone came free, a sound rose from the opening beneath it that Origbo had not heard at that spot in longer than anyone could remember. Water, moving, alive, welling up slow and clear from a spring that had been sealed shut and forgotten beneath the ground where this village had spent decades pouring out grief it never needed to give. Someone screamed, someone wept. An old woman near the back sat straight down in the dirt, her hands over her mouth, and Baba Fashina knelt at the edge of the newly opened spring with water soaking through the knees of his cloth and said nothing at all for a very long time, because There was nothing a man could say that would undo 40 years spent guarding the wrong understanding of his own history. It was Aduke who finally broke the silence, standing at the edge of the crowd, with a hand on each of her children's shoulders, her voice steadier than anyone expected it to be. The law is finished, she said. Whatever it was protecting, it isn't twins. It never was. No one argued with her, not even Baba Fashina, who by then had gone from the village's fiercest defender of the old order to a man kneeling in mud, staring at water he could not have imagined seeing again in his lifetime. The council met before the sun had fully set, and there was no argument left to have. The crossroads law that had shaped grief and silence in Origbo for longer than anyone could trace was ended that same evening, not by vote so much as by a village too exhausted and too humbled to pretend it had any standing left to disagree with what the land had just shown them plainly. Iyabo was not forgiven that night, and the story does not pretend she was. But she was permitted to remain, and in the weeks that followed, it would be Aduke, not the council, who quietly decided how much room the old woman would be allowed back into her family's life. That evening, though, Aduke sat with her son and daughter at the edge of the newly running spring, water filling the dark around them for the first time in over 2 decades. She reached for her daughter's wrist and untied the old frayed bracelet, her hands steady now in a way they had never been the night she first tied it in a storm. She retied it slowly, carefully, and when she finished, she said both her children's names aloud, together, for the first time since before the storm had ever taken them from her. Behind them, the spring kept rising, filling the dry riverbed one slow inch at a time, the way water finally moves when it has been given somewhere to go. And this is where this story ends. Like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss out on the next secret tale of Africa we will be releasing soon.